Hello my good people, Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2003 BMW E46 M3. Today on the M3 behind me, we're going to be covering how to service your drive belts and tensioners. In front of me I have a Continental kit which is available on fcpo.com. It includes INA shuffler units, which will consist of an idler pulley and two tensioners. One is for our AC and one is for our main belt system, as well as two Continental belts. Now typically these are going to last you anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. It's all going to be dependent on the type of conditions your vehicle sees. Now usually as these start to fail, an easy way to inspect them is simply by doing a visual inspection. As these belts age, they will start to crack and sometimes flake, especially in the ribbed areas. Other times when the idler or the tensioner assemblies start to fail, they'll get a little bit noisy, sometimes on startup, and then sometimes they'll just be continuously noisy as the vehicle runs. So if you start hearing that, just go ahead, hop in there and replace everything if you can. If not, if you're trying to determine which unit has failed and you only want to do one at a time, detension the belts, pull them off, and you can spin all the idlers independently and see which one has failed. But before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this DIY, a flashlight will come in handy, a small torque wrench. I have a 3/8 drive torque wrench. I have two different size flathead screwdrivers. I have a small 1/4" drive ratchet as well as a 3/8 drive ratchet with a couple extensions. We have a T50 as well as an 8mm hex. We have a T25. I have a couple different 10mm sockets as well as an 8 and a 13. We're also going to be using a 16mm for our tensioners. We have CTA A886. This is a fan clutch removal tool which will come in really handy for removing the fan clutch. If you have an electric fan, you will not need this. And then some nice to haves are some pliers, some flush cuts if you're going to be dealing with zip ties, which we are, to secure our oil cooler off to the side when we get started. A bungee cord will work as well. I have a small Allen key. This is going to be used as a locking pin for the AC tensioner when we go to remove it. And if I didn't mention it already, an electric ratchet makes life a little bit easier. Now we know what we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. We are under the hood of the E46. We're going to get started by removing our ducting and our intake, and then we'll work on getting some hardware off of our fan shroud. To get started, we have 4 rivets on this upper piece to remove. I like to use some pliers. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and work on removing our intake next. Now while our car is equipped with an aftermarket E-Venturi intake, the idea is still going to be pretty similar for your stock airbox. Then we'll go ahead and pull off the 2 dust boots that cover our electrical connectors. There's a tab on the interior that you just push on and lift up. Same thing for the other one. We can go ahead and set those to the side. This cover simply pops off. It's held in by a couple clips, usually 4, sometimes 3 in this case. Now with that, we have a couple 10mm bolts to remove. In this case, we have 2 10mm bolts and 1 10mm nut. Now because we have the aftermarket, we only have to get rid of 1 of the 10mm bolts and 1 nut. So there's 3 total around the headlight module that you can remove to get your airbox out. Next, we're going to pull off the mass airflow sensor connector. You have a tab on either side of the housing. Go ahead and push those together and lift up. All right, now again our intake is a little bit different, so I'm going to work on removing a couple more components to be able to free this intake out. I have a couple rivets that hold some ducting in place. Once we get those out, you then can continue removing this whole assembly out of our way. Now something that will be factory is your hose clamps back here. You're going to want to undo these so you can get the rest of the intake off, or airbox off I should say, going into the intake. All right, next we're going to work on removing some of this fan shrouding. Now typically you have 2 L shrouds, 1 on either side of the fan. Our vehicle's missing the one on the passenger side, so we'll just go ahead and show you how you remove the one on the driver's side. But it's held in by 2 plastic rivets, 1 right up top and 1 right beneath your coolant line, in between the coolant line and the fan shroud. So we'll go ahead and pop those 2 rivets off. While I have you over here, we're going to work on removing some hardware on the driver's side of the fan shroud. Now our car is equipped with a CSF radiator, so the hardware is a little bit different in some spots, but you have 4 T25s that hold the shroud onto the radiator. You have 2 up top and 2 at the bottom. Now on this side, we have an 8mm that goes into our radiator, so it's gonna be a little bit different. But under the radiator hose neck, you're gonna have a T25 holding the shroud on. All right, moving over to the passenger side of things, we have this electrical connector here. This actually will separate with the unit itself, the module, from the fan shroud. You can simply go ahead and lift it up and pull it away. I lifted it up from the closer to the fan side and over. We'll go ahead and pull up this electrical connector along with it. Sometimes these are jammed into the shroud pretty good, but there is an opening for them to sneak out. We'll just go ahead and tuck these over by the secondary air pump. Up here, we still have our traditional T25, which we're gonna go ahead and remove next. Okay, now with that out, while we have you up here, we're gonna go ahead and just break our fan free from the water pump, but we're gonna leave everything in place. Then we'll go ahead and get underneath the car and continue removing some fan shroud hardware. Using our CTA fan clutch removal tool, using the wrench, we're gonna go clockwise to break this nut free on our water pump and fan. Now, our unit's pretty new. If you have seen our CSF radiator upgrade video recently, these have not been on there very long, so there's a good chance it may break free from the water pump without too much force. If you don't have these tools, you can use a long flathead or pry bar and a 32mm wrench. That's actually beautiful. That was nice and light. With that there, make sure it's actually free. Perfect. That's good for now. Now we have that broken free, we're gonna go ahead and raise the vehicle. We have a couple things to remove before we gain access to the rest of the hardware for the fan shroud. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right, underneath the E46 M3, we have a splash shield to remove first. It's held on by 7 8mm bolts, so we'll go ahead and zap those off first. I'm just gonna use the electric ratchet with an 8mm socket to speed things up a bit. All right, next on our list is gonna be to remove this oil cooler so it's out of our way. You have 2 T25s, one on either side that you wanna remove. We'll start on the driver's side by the oil cooler lines. Our T25 is hidden right here. So we'll go ahead and zap that one off. Now at this point, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can use a bungee cord or zip ties. I have a couple zip ties staged, ready to go. That I'm gonna go ahead and use to zip tie around the sway bar. But a bungee cord works as well. So I'm just swinging it over like this. Get my zip tie around my sway bar. That'll give us just enough room to work with. Now, while I have you under here, we're gonna go ahead and remove the final 2 T25s that hold the bottom of our fan shroud to our radiator, and 1 T25 on the lower right underneath the lower radiator hose. All right, now at this point, we're gonna work on removing the rest of our fan, and we'll pull out the fan and the fan shroud together. As you undo the fan, you wanna make sure that you don't lose it and drop it into the engine bay and possibly risk damaging a fin. So just try to gently spin it off. Once you see a lot of threads exposed on the water pump, then you know you're probably nearing the end. You can get ready to catch the fan. There's our fan. Now I'll pull it together out with the fan shroud. So the key to getting this fan shroud out is usually if you dip the passenger corner down, you can get the driver's side, mainly the tab where that T25 goes through, up and over the radiator neck, and then you can kind of pull the whole thing out. I actually went ahead and put the fan on one thread, so I didn't have to worry about balancing the fan and the fan shroud in my hands. But once I get it over this little hump here, now I can work on undoing my fan again all the way. We're gonna go ahead and head back down, and we're gonna start by removing the AC belt off first, as well as the tensioner. That way we can have room to remove our main drive belt and go from there. All right, my good people, back under the M3, we're gonna start by removing our AC belt. While we do that, I'm also gonna go ahead and lock the tensioner in a position where I can go ahead and access both 13mm bolts to remove them. If you're not replacing your tensioner, then you can simply untension it like we're gonna be doing and pulling the belt off. For that, you're gonna need a 16mm socket. Using a 16 on a ratchet. We'll go ahead and detension that. We can pull our belt off, just like so. And then I'm gonna use a small Allen tool to simply lock the tensioner so that I can access both the 13 on the top and on the bottom. I'm gonna start with the top 13 first, and I'll show you why in just a moment. With the top 13 removed, Now we can still go ahead and detension the tensioner so that we can get our tool back. If you're using a random piece of metal and you don't care about that tool, then don't worry about it. But I would like this Allen key back. So I'm gonna go ahead and release the tension again, pull my tool out. And now we can go ahead and do our bottom 13mm bolt. So leave that bottom one tight until you've taken the top one out. That way you don't have to worry about losing any tools or fighting the tensioner on the workbench once you've taken it off and you want to get your little locking tool back, whatever that may be. All right, back up top, we're going to work on removing our main drive belt. One thing to note on the main tensioner assembly, sometimes it's a T50, sometimes it's an 8mm hex. You want to check and see what your old hardware is before you go ahead and start detensioning everything. On this vehicle, the old hardware is an 8mm hex, so we'll go ahead and detension everything, pull our belt off, and then go from there. We got our 8 on our 3/8 drive ratchet. Make sure it's in all the way. Go ahead and detension that. These are hydraulic, so they're going to feel a little bit different than the AC one. But once you get the belt off in one spot, then you can take your tool off and take your belt off. It would never hurt to take a picture of how the belt's routed before you pull it off. Now we can go ahead and work on removing our idler and our tensioner. So we'll start with the idler first. For that, we're going to need a 16mm socket to break that free and back it out. Usually these have dust caps on them. You can use a small flathead screwdriver. Someone took these off a long time ago, as you can see how crusty everything is, which is probably why they're making noise. Note the back of these have a small dowel on them. These lock them into the proper spot on the block side of things, so it can only really go one way, but just make sure you line that up properly with the little locating divot on the receiving end of the alternator bracket. All right, with our belt off and our idler pulley off, next we're going to remove the pulley off of our tensioner assembly. Again, using the same 8mm hex. Go ahead and break that free. We need to remove this so we can access one of the 13mm bolts that holds the tensioner assembly to the block anyway, so this has to come out. We have 3 13mm bolts that we want to tackle now. The first one's going to be at the top of the tensioner assembly. Usually there's a small dust cover that's on there. Ours is missing, so we'll go ahead and continue with our 13mm socket on our 3/8 drive ratchet. Again, our kit comes with new hardware, so don't worry about losing it, but they are specific to what part of the tensioner they go in. So this top one is going to be really long. Just keep that in mind. On top of that, you have a washer that sits in here, which is going to stay on this old one. We have a new one with our new kit anyways. Next, we'll get the 13 at the bottom of the shock of the tensioner assembly itself. Again, pay attention, this one also has a washer on it, which our kit comes with, but you're going to want to make sure you install the washer behind the head of your bolt for this one too. Those are the only 2 washers on here. Again, this one's pretty short, not as long as the top one. And then we can take the final 13, which is hidden between the crankshaft and the tensioner itself. Here's a look at that tensioner a little bit better. You have your top bolt, you have your bolt hole where the idler sits itself, you have your bottom 13, here's that sneaky 13. This is the shortest one of them all pretty much. So now we'll go ahead and get our new one and get ready to install it. Now we have everything removed, we can go ahead and install our new tensioner assembly. We'll go ahead and take our unit. We'll take our longest bolt. I've already started the washer on it. And we'll use that one to kind of hang everything in place once we position it properly. All right, with that loosely in place, we'll take the bottom second longest bolt that goes through the bottom of our shock body and get that one started as well. And with that one started, now we'll take our shortest 13mm bolt. Now that we have them all started by hand, we'll go ahead and snug them up all the way, and then we'll torque all 3 down to 24 Newton meters. Now for the top one, we can go ahead and put the little dust cover on that comes with the INA Scheffler kit, which is really nice. That'll keep any moisture and debris out of there in the long run. Now we can take our idler wheel or idler pulley and install that next. You want to make sure the dust shield has the proper imprint with the lip sitting lower, closer to the idler pulley, and the stepped portion raised towards the end of the bolt. Our new hardware is a T50, unlike the old one that was an 8mm hex that was pulled out, so just keep in mind those can change as well. Just snug it up quickly with the electric ratchet. Our T50, or possibly 8mm hex in your case, is going to be torqued down to 38 Newton meters. Now we can move up and we can install our idler pulley, our new one. For this one, we will be reusing the same hardware. Again, don't forget about the notched portion, which is going to key in down here on the spacer between the alternator bracket and where the idler is going to sit. And we'll go ahead and snug it up the rest of the way using our 16mm socket, and then we'll go ahead and torque it down to 38 Newton meters. And we can install the dust cap that comes with that one as well. All right, now that our tensioner is situated and our idler pulley is situated, we'll go ahead and install our belt. You're gonna wanna make sure you route it the same way it came off. So now what I'm gonna do, now that I have it roughly situated, I'm gonna take it off a part that's easier to reach for me. In this case, it's gonna be the water pump. I'll go ahead and take the belt off the water pump. I'm gonna situate it onto the tensioner itself now. We'll take our T50, get that situated in there nicely. A good bite, release the tension. Bring the belt over onto our water pump. And now with our belt situated, it looks like it's set on all the grooves properly, all the pulleys. We can go ahead and put our dust cap on. Now we have our drive belt installed, we have our idler pulley and our tensioner all sorted. We can go ahead and raise the car up or crawl underneath if you're working at home and get ready to install our new AC tensioner and our new AC belt. Back under the M3, we're gonna go ahead and install our new AC belt tensioner. The new one already comes pre-tensioned, if you will, with a lock pin, which makes it really easy to install. You're gonna wanna reuse the same 13mm bolts that you removed. We'll go ahead and kind of just situate it in place. We'll start the bottom one first. Once that bottom one is started, then we can go ahead and start the top one. Once those are snug up, we're gonna go ahead and torque them down to 24 Newton meters. Now we have both our 13mm bolts on and torqued up. We can go ahead and grab our new belt and get that into place. We'll use the fact that it's locked right now to help us install the belt. Now we can grab our 16 and our 3/8 drive ratchet. We'll remove the tension from that, pull the pin. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our fan shroud and our fan at the same time. Again, it's gonna be a little bit of a shimmy, especially with this ducting over here, but we'll get it in. The key thing here is to make sure you don't drop your fan and that the fan shroud's gonna lock in properly once everything's situated. And make sure this same tab engages at the bottom. For now, this can stay like this. At this point, you can thread the fan on more if you want, but the second you start the car, it's gonna self-lock into place, so you don't really have to worry about it, which is great on these reverse thread fans. But for now, let's hit underneath. We'll make sure everything is lined up on our fan shroud down there, and we'll button up the bottom half of everything, and then we'll finish up top. All right, underneath the car, we're gonna make sure that our fan shroud is keyed into our radiator here, which it is not. So we'll go ahead and gently pop it up a bit, and then pull it down. Make sure that's nice and secure. Now we'll go ahead and take our two T25s, or in our case, 10mm bolts, and we'll go ahead and secure the fan shroud to the radiator here at the bottom, starting on the driver's side. I'm gonna go ahead and start the other one now before I tighten that down so I know they both line up properly. Once you have those started, we can go ahead and snug them down gently. They are just screws going into plastic anyways, so you don't wanna over tighten them. Now we have that situated, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our oil cooler into position. Remove your zip ties or your bungee cord, whichever you used. There's two tabs, one on either side of the oil cooler that key into the radiator. You literally cannot miss them. Once you have those situated, you can go ahead and start your two T25s. And now with that situated, all we have to do down here is grab our splash shield and our 7 to 8mm bolts and snug those back into place. Make sure the front half of your splash shield keys in pretty much underneath the bumper. It's gonna hold itself up there. Start 1 8mm in the back. It's gonna hold everything in place. Now we have all 7 of our 8mm secured. This is all buttoned up. Let's head back up top. We'll reinstall our intake and we'll get one step closer to wrapping up this DIY. Back up top, we're gonna go ahead and install our T25 on the passenger side, top corner. This is the longest T25 out of the 4 that hold the fan shroud to the radiator, so just keep that in mind when you're reassembling everything at home. While I have you over here, we'll go ahead and reattach our electrical connector and our fan module here. Starting with the connector first. This one just keys into the fan shroud itself. We have our module up top. It's got a small little tab here and a small little tab here. Those bite on either side of here. There we go. Now moving over to the driver's side, we'll install our other T25. This would be a T25 on your normal setup. We're going to go ahead and install our 10mm bolt in this case for the CSF unit. The location's right underneath the upper radiator hose neck. Now we're going to go ahead and install the rest of our fan shroud. Again, we only have the driver's side in this case, but if you had your passenger, now would be the right time to do that as well. There is a small hook on the fan shroud there that the surround clips into, aside from the rivets that hold it into place. So you want to make sure it locks into place there, and that lines it up perfectly for your 2 plastic rivets to go back in. We'll start with the top rivet first. Get that lined up. Push that baby in. Might use the end of a screwdriver to help course it in. Sometimes the fit is a little bit snug. There we go. Up top, we're going to install our rivet as well. Again, we only have one surround, so usually these stack up against each other and then take up all the slack that you're going to see that we have here with our rivet. Go ahead and close that in as much as possible. Beautiful. Now we have that situated. At this point, we can go ahead and reinstall our airbox. Again, we have the E Venturi intake, so we're going to go ahead and install that. But the idea is going to be generally the same. Your airbox, your 10mm nut, your 2 10mm bolts, along with the headlight module. So we're just going to go ahead and go through that right now. Once you have that, just make sure you tighten up your clamps properly. Again, usually a 7 or 6mm hex, depending on what clamps you have on your vehicle, will work. If you want to use a socket or a flathead screwdriver, works great as well. At this point, speaking of the mass airflow sensor, go ahead and replug that in as well. Now we can take our headlight module or ballast, whatever you'd like to call it, and place this back over into place. And I'll go ahead and snug them up quickly with the electric ratchet. Then we can take our cover once more, place that over, and we can take our electrical connectors and plug those back in. And with that, my good people, we have one last piece of ducting to install, which is going to be this top piece here. Again, this traditionally will key into your airbox, but we'll go ahead and place that there. We'll grab our 4 rivets. That is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a pretty straightforward job on the S54. A little invasive if you consider how many things have to come off for you to access both the bottom and upper tensioners, but really straightforward stuff. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's a specific job you want to see us do on the E46 M3, let us know in the comments below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.